I want you to imagine looking up at the night sky. Usually when you do that, you're picturing that familiar, infinitely expanding void we are all so used to, floating rocks, burning gas, the invisible forces warping space-time. But what if you shifted your perspective entirely? What if instead of a mystical cosmic void, you were actually staring up at the intricate, highly pressurized workings of a giant, hyper-efficient industrial plumbing system?
It is a really jarring image to overlay onto the cosmos, honestly. I mean, we are so trained to think in terms of astrophysics, relativity, quantum fields, theoretical particles. But viewing the universe as a functioning mechanical plant completely changes how you interact with the observational data we've collected over the last century.
And that is exactly our mission for today's deep dive. We are exploring a wildly unorthodox framework known as the Correa theory, authored by a chemical engineer named Daniel Correa. We have a massive stack of sources on the table today, spanning detailed technical documents to these incredible, sprawling, blueprint-style flowcharts. All of these materials attempt to explain the 95% of our universe that astrophysics simply labels as dark.
Right, dark matter and dark energy.
Exactly. But Correa tackles this massive cosmological gap entirely through the lens of fluid mechanics, process engineering, and thermodynamics.
Which is a fundamental departure from the standard model. Astrophysics often relies on introducing theoretical unobservable particles or forces to balance the cosmic equations. Process engineering doesn't allow for that. It relies strictly on mass balances, pressure gradients, and observable fluid dynamics.
Right, because if something is missing from the equation, an engineer assumes there is a mechanical flow issue, not an invisible ghost particle. Before we start tracing the pipes and valves of this theoretical framework, I want to make a very clear disclaimer to you, the listener. We are not sitting here today endorsing the Correa theory as absolute, undeniable scientific truth. Our goal is to take you on an impartial, fascinating exploration of these ideas precisely as they're presented in the source material.
Yeah, we want to see how dramatically our understanding of reality might shift if we just swap the lens from that of an astrophysicist to that of an industrial engineer.
We're going to look at the math, the flowcharts, and the logic provided, completely without taking a side.
It's the ultimate thought experiment in cross-disciplinary thinking. It asks the simple question: what happens when we apply the strict, unforgiving laws of a chemical refinery to the entire universe?
Okay, let's unpack this. The core premise of the Correa theory relies on one massive shift in how we categorize the universe. Current standard cosmology treats our universe as a closed, isolated system. It assumes everything that exists is contained within our boundaries and nothing is outside. The Correa theory rips that boundary away.
It really does. It proposes our universe is actually an open system. Specifically, it defines our universe as a reservoir reactor embedded within a much, much larger external environment called the multiverse. What's fascinating here is how that single parameter change cascades into a complete re-engineering of phenomena we thought we understood. Take the Big Bang, for instance. You can see it mapped out clearly on the flowcharts provided in our source stack. And honestly, looking at these diagrams feels like sitting in the control room of a nuclear plant.
Yeah, it really does.
In this model, the Big Bang isn't treated as a magical singularity that just popped out of nowhere to create space and time.
I'm looking at this primary blueprint right now, and instead of a singularity, there is a distinct mechanical symbol here labeled intake valve or injection. Are they literally arguing that the Big Bang was just an industrial valve opening?
That is the exact argument. According to the technical documents, the surrounding multiverse operates as an incredibly high-pressure environment, holding ultra-compressed raw material, essentially pure, raw hydrogen and dense energy. The Big Bang was simply the moment an intake valve opened, shooting this ultra-compressed fluid from the high-pressure multiverse into the exceptionally low-pressure space of our nascent universe.
Wait, so the initial violent expansion of the universe, what the standard model calls inflation, isn't some mysterious stretching of the fabric of space-time?
In fluid mechanics, that phenomenon requires no new physics to explain. It is simply the sudden, violent decompression of a fluid as it enters a low-pressure reservoir.
Think about the mechanics of spraying a highly pressurized aerosol can into a large empty room. The compressed gas instantly violently expands to fill the available volume. The mechanics are identical, just scaled up to cosmic proportions.
Right, exactly.
So, if we follow the arrows moving to the middle of this flowchart, we enter what the theory calls the universal reservoir. This represents our visible universe. And in this reservoir, stars are given a very specific industrial classification. The flowchart labels stars as thermal reactors.
The genius of this specific analogy is how it establishes a functional mechanical purpose for every celestial body within what Correa calls a sustainable recirculation cycle. In a closed system universe, stars are just burning through fuel until they eventually die, leading the universe toward an inevitable heat death.
Just slowly fizzling out.
Right. But in an open system refinery, you don't just dump raw materials into a tank and let them sit there to rot. You process them. The mechanical purpose of these stellar thermal reactors is to take that injected raw hydrogen and synthesize it into heavier processed elements through nuclear fusion.
But if the universe is an open system refinery, and the stars are constantly churning out processed product, eventually the tank fills up. How does the product get out? What serves as the exhaust pipe? Looking at the bottom of the flowchart, it points directly to black holes.
Which is wild.
It really is, because standard astrophysics paints black holes as these terrifying dead ends where matter gets crushed into a singularity. But the Correa documents label them as suction pumps. Specifically, positive displacement pumps.
For anyone who isn't a mechanical engineer, think of how a medical syringe works. A positive displacement pump physically traps a specific, fixed amount of fluid and forcefully pushes it out the other side. It doesn't rely on momentum. It relies on mechanical force.
That is such a practical way to visualize it.
It is. This framework completely rehabilitates the image of the black hole. Rather than a cosmic garbage disposal that destroys information, a black hole is a vital return compactor for the refinery.
So they are actively suctioning up the heavy elements synthesized by the stars, along with the dispersed energy floating around the reservoir.
They suction it up, and then they recompress it adiabatically. And by adiabatic compression, the documents mean squishing that matter down so incredibly fast and efficiently that it doesn't leak any heat or mass back into the surrounding universe.
It traps it all.
It traps all that energy and physically, forcefully pushes it back out into the multiverse. The multiverse then takes that heavy, processed waste, refines it back into raw hydrogen, and re-injects it through the intake valves.
Meaning, our universe operates as a zero-waste facility. It's a perfectly balanced, multiversal recycling plant. I mean, compare that to human industrial recycling. We could learn a thing or two from cosmic plumbing.
We really could.
But of course, if this model is so perfect at recycling visible matter, where does it leave the invisible stuff? What about the 95% of the universe we can't actually see?
This is where the framework applies a heavy dose of Occam's razor. In standard physics, you are juggling three massively disconnected mysteries: the accelerated expansion of the universe, the invisible mass holding galaxies together, and the repulsive force of the vacuum.
Right.
The Correa model argues that inventing new, unobservable ghost particles to balance equations is just bad engineering. Instead, we should look for a single mechanical cause, and that cause is the interaction between the central injection, the Big Bang, and the peripheral suction, the black holes.
Let's tackle dark energy first. Standard theory leans heavily on dark energy being a mysterious, repulsive force pushing the universe apart from the inside, causing galaxies to accelerate away from us. But the Correa theory tosses that out completely. It redefines dark energy as a suction gradient.
It is the mechanical suction work being performed by the multiverse. Imagine watching water flow down a large industrial drain. As the water gets closer to the actual drain pipe at the bottom, its velocity increases. It accelerates.
It spins faster.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The universe's accelerated expansion is simply matter, and energy speeding up as they get closer to the multiversal discharge sinks, the black hole's suction pumps.
Wait, so instead of a mysterious force pushing outward from the inside, it's literally just a vacuum pulling from the outside. The flow rate of matter just naturally increases as it nears the exit.
Which elegantly eliminates the need for dark energy entirely. The math of mass balances works perfectly if you account for external suction.
And then the theory goes straight after dark matter, completely dismantling it as an invisible physical mass. The flowcharts have a section for the phenomenon we call dark matter, but they label it as tractive drag.
Tractive drag.
Yes, it's described as the mechanical tension or the sheer stress of the spatial fabric itself being sucked from the periphery. We know galaxies rotate faster at their edges than standard gravity allows. Astrophysics looks at that and says, well, there must be a halo of invisible mass there holding the stars together.
But process engineering looks at the exact same data and says, no, the galaxy is just being pulled by an external vacuum, creating physical tension.
Which brings us to a section of the source material that the author calls the Correa checkmate. It is a brilliant, undeniable logical trap for standard cosmology, and we need to pause to really digest the implications of it.
We definitely do. If dark matter were an actual physical substance with gravitational mass, which the standard model absolutely requires it to be, then black holes would have been absorbing it endlessly for billions of years.
Because black holes consume anything with mass that crosses their path.
Precisely. If they were constantly swallowing massive, dense clouds of invisible heavy particles, black holes would have ballooned in size. The mass balance equations show they would be trillions of times heavier than observational data proves they are. The math simply doesn't work out. Black holes haven't grown to impossible weights. Therefore, dark matter cannot be a physical substance falling into them.
That is a massive blow to the standard model. If dark matter isn't a substance, it has to be a dynamic pressure effect.
And that tension ceases to be relevant the moment matter gets near a black hole. Once the material enters the actual suction channel, the sheer stress of the spatial fabric is released, which perfectly aligns with why we don't see evidence of dark matter affecting the immediate mechanics of black hole event horizons.
It makes so much intuitive sense when you visualize the universe as a fluid. The sources bring up this incredible concept called galactic unwinding. Under this theory, spiral galaxies aren't static, permanent structures anchored by dark matter halos. They are temporary vortexes caught in a massive river of flow. The stars moving unusually fast at the extreme edges of a galaxy are just accelerating toward the external discharge nozzle.
The documents point to observational data of stellar streams and what astronomers call jellyfish galaxies, these massive structures with long trailing tails of matter being stripped away. Standard astronomy often views these as specific anomalies caused by localized ram pressure.
Right.
But from an engineering standpoint, this is empirical evidence of matter being stretched into linear flow channels by sheer stress. The galaxy is literally unwinding as it gets sucked outward toward the multiversal drains.
But hold on, if that's true, how does this theory explain gravitational lensing? We've all seen those famous dark matter maps where light bends around seemingly empty patches of space. Standard physics says the light is bending around clumps of invisible dark matter. If dark matter is just sheer stress, why does the light bend?
The Correa theory has a wonderfully simple engineering answer for that as well. Density gradient refraction.
Density gradient refraction.
Yes, in fluid dynamics, light naturally changes its path when it passes through zones of different pressure and density. Think about looking down a long asphalt highway on a hot summer day. The air above the road is at a different density than the air higher up, and it causes the light to bend and shimmer, creating a mirage.
Oh, wow.
The spatial fabric itself acts as a lens due to the mechanical stress and pressure variances of being pulled by the suction pumps, not because there's a clump of invisible particles sitting in the way.
So we have this massive, churning, open system. The multiverse injects raw hydrogen through the intake valve. The stellar thermal reactors cook it into heavy elements, and the black hole suction pumps suck it all back out. But I want you, the listener, to consider a genuinely terrifying thought. If these massive suction pumps are constantly sucking matter and space out of our reservoir, why doesn't our universe just deflate?
It's a very valid concern.
Right. If you suck all the air out of a plastic bottle, it violently crushes inward. Why haven't we collapsed into a vacuum?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, any good industrial engineer knows you cannot safely run a high-pressure differential system without robust safety valves and constant monitoring. The system has to have a failsafe. In the Correa flowcharts, there is a dedicated pathway designated as the L1 feedback control loop.
The L1 feedback control loop.
Yes. This multiversal control loop is explicitly designed to prevent two catastrophic engineering failures. The first is the vacuum collapse you just mentioned, where the universe implodes from uncontrolled suction.
And the sources mention a second failure state called the waste bag scenario, which sounds like an absolute engineering disaster.
It would be. A waste bag scenario happens if the suction pumps fail or get clogged, and the injected matter just piles up uselessly in the reservoir without being processed and returned. The system would bloat and lose all functional purpose. To prevent either of these, the L1 control loop constantly monitors the internal density of our universe.
Like a thermostat monitoring the temperature of a room?
Very similar. In this loop, the process variable is the actual energy and matter density inside our space at any given moment. The set point is the critical internal pressure level required to keep structures like galaxies and stars cohesive. As the black holes increase their suction power and start emptying the reservoir, which again is what we currently observe as the accelerated expansion of the universe, the internal density naturally falls.
Because more material is leaving than is entering.
Right. And if that density falls below the critical set point, the system detects a critical vacuum forming. To prevent a catastrophic implosion, the multiverse triggers an automatic safety mechanism. It forces the intake valve to open wider, triggering a re-big bang.
A re-big bang. So it sends a massive new expansion pulse of ultra-compressed matter into our universe just to restore the internal pressure. The universe physically self-corrects to avoid collapse.
It ensures the reservoir maintains an equilibrium between the intake valves and the suction pumps.
But this begs a massive question. How does the multiverse know when the pressure is dropping? What is actually transmitting the telemetry data from our universe back to the control room? The most mind-bending detail in this entire stack of sources, and the one that took me the longest to wrap my head around, is how the Correa theory views light.
It is a radical departure from everything we were taught in physics classes.
Completely. Standard physics teaches us that light, or electromagnetic radiation, is a wave-particle duality. It's energy illuminating the void, and the speed of light is the ultimate cosmic speed limit. But in the Correa model, light acts as the IT infrastructure for the cosmos. Light is the data bus for the L1 control loop.
Think about how a computer engineer views a fiber optic cable. The cable itself isn't the point. The point is the telemetry it carries back to the motherboard. Because light travels at the maximum possible speed in our fluid medium, it functions as a real-time signal transmitter.
That makes perfect sense from an engineering perspective.
Exactly. It isn't just bouncing off rocks so we can see them. It's constantly feeding real-time pressure, density, and flow readings back to the multiverse's external sensors.
It's sending mechanical telemetry. That completely blew my mind. The light from a distant star isn't just ancient history reaching our telescopes. It's a live data stream communicating the precise thermodynamic state of that region of the reservoir back to the external control system. It allows for an immediate corrective response if the system starts to destabilize.
It strips away all the cosmic mysticism and replaces it with sheer, calculated utility. Every single element of the cosmos has a defined mechanical job. Nothing exists just to exist. And that strict utilitarian framework leads to the final, perhaps most philosophically profound, section of the Correa theory. Even the concept of time itself gets a radical overhaul.
So what does this all mean? If everything in this model is just mechanical flow, pressure gradients, and data telemetry, where does time fit into the equation? Does an industrial pipeline even care about time?
In standard physics, particularly since Einstein, time is treated as a physical dimension. It's part of the fabric of space-time. It is something that can bend, warp, dilate, and theoretically be traveled through. But in a chemical engineering model, time is completely stripped of its status as a physical dimension. Time is merely a human-invented control parameter.
Meaning it's just a gauge we created to understand the machinery.
Exactly that. It is a tool we use to measure a change of state, or to calculate the differential between two conditions of matter during the transformation process. If the flow of this cosmic plumbing system were to miraculously stop, if the thermal reactors paused and the suction pumps halted, and the matter transformation ceased completely, time would lose its reading value.
It wouldn't freeze, it would just cease to exist as a concept.
Because there would be no physical transformation left to measure. Time isn't a river we're floating down. Time is just the reading on the gauge we check while watching the universal machinery run its processes.
That is incredibly heavy. But you have to admit, it's also deeply elegant. By swapping the lens of theoretical astrophysics for the rigid rules of chemical engineering, a universe that is supposedly full of phantom particles, unexplainable missing mass, and mystical dark forces suddenly transforms.
It really does.
It snaps into focus as a perfectly balanced, hyper-efficient matter transformation machine. It really reminds you of the sheer value of cross-disciplinary thinking. Sometimes, if a field is stuck on a massive problem for decades, like the nature of dark matter, the answer isn't to invent a new invisible variable to force the math to work. Sometimes the answer to a cosmic mystery is found by asking someone who builds pipes and pressure valves for a living.
It definitely provides a robust, logically cohesive alternative to the standard cosmological model. Relying on observable fluid dynamics rather than theoretical conjecture clears up a lot of mathematical headaches. But looking at the entirety of this framework, this raises an important question.
I have a feeling I know where you're going with this.
If the Correa theory is right, and our entire visible universe is indeed just one highly efficient thermal reactor embedded within a massive multiversal industrial plant, endlessly refining raw hydrogen into heavy, complex elements, only to have black holes systematically pump all of that processed material back out into the void, what exactly is the multiverse building with all of our manufactured product?